So we begin. He who could address this audience without a quailing sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. A feeling has crept over me quite unfavorable to the exercise of my limited powers of speech. The task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. Well, what part of an address is this? We talked about parts of an address last time. It's the exordium, yes. It's part of the introduction, as we would call it. And what do you think about it so far? Honest opinion, what do you think about it so far?
To me, it's a surprising tactic to downplay your ability as the way to start it, but it might be an also interesting tactic in ethos in trying to, make yourself seem like somebody who is going to try their best, or he's already being honest from the get-go, it seems. So
yes, he is. Although, let me throw just a little wrinkle in that.
Yes.
He's already very well known.
Yes.
As a person, and as a speaker even. So, how then would you gauge this? Let me read the next sentence. I know that apologies of this sort are generally considered flat and unmeaning. What effect does that sentence have?
So I think the preceding sentences could almost come across as disingenuous.
Could be, yeah, you might think so.
A tactic to lower expectations. Mm-hmm. And here I think he is saying, I know what you might be thinking about this.
Yeah.
And it's not that.
And that's a good tactic in many respects. Let me put it in a more general sense. If you think your audience is going to think something negative about you, what should you do? Say it, address it. Yeah, make it a subject. Don't let it sit there. So he's made a very modest self-introduction, which some people might regard as being a little disingenuous or false modesty. But he's now going to say, well, look, I know that when you start off this way, such apologies are usually considered to be pretty meaningless, pretty flat. I know that. I'm aware of that. Always keep your awareness, if you can, ahead of that of your audience or your reader. What do you think of an op-ed that you are reading in which 5 paragraphs before you read it, you have already articulated to yourself the main argument that is being made? What do you think of a piece of writing like that? Boring, yes, and they're wasting 5 paragraphs on you too. In other words, consider your audience and try to stay ahead of your audience. And if you are saying or presenting something to which you think the reaction might be of a certain kind, address that reaction. Make it a subject. He says, should I seem at ease, my appearance would much misrepresent me. The little experience I have had in addressing public meetings in country schoolhouses avails me nothing on the present occasion. Now, this was a very grand occasion. He did have hundreds of people there. That's important to remember. This was a very important address given in Rochester. He says, the papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. Now, 4th of July orations at that time were very common. They are far less common today. We generally do not celebrate the 4th of July with orations today. Anybody ever hear a 4th of July oration live? Oh dear, I thought maybe at least one person might have. No one. Well, maybe they've gone completely by the boards. But they were very common at this time to celebrate the country's birthday. It was very common to have a speaker or speakers. That tradition lasted all the way into the early 20th century at least. So he's being called upon to give this 4th of July oration. Then the next paragraph, your paragraphing may be a little different, but the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable. And the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. Now, this changes the tone of the introduction, I would argue. And how can one deny this statement? It is certainly a truth that that distance is a great distance, and that many people are never able to compass that distance. Douglas has. He doesn't say exactly how, although he's written about it, about his own life. He says, "You will not therefore be surprised if in what I have to say I evince no elaborate preparation, nor grace my speech with any high-sounding exordium." And I have to say that compared with much of the rhetoric of his day, this is not terribly high-sounding. It seems formal to us, without a doubt. But this is not bombastic. This is not a form of cheerleading. This is a fairly direct address in relatively straightforward language. But he says, I'm not going to do a high-sounding exordium. And there he uses the very word itself, high-sounding introduction. With little experience and with less learning, I've been able to throw my thoughts hastily and imperfectly together. Now, Douglas had studied a lot. He'd studied rhetoric a lot. So he had learning in that sense. But he had no schooling as such. He had none of the advantages of schooling that so many people in his day had, including many in the audience. So his contention that he essentially has little learning in a formal sense is true. He's an autodidact, for the most part. Autodidact, self-taught. That's what he has done. So he says, I will proceed to lay them before you, my thoughts. So if this is the end of the introduction, the exordium, what do we go to next if we're thinking about parts of an address? The narratio, the narration. And what does the narration generally do in an address? What is its function? Now you've introduced yourself. You said you're supposed to be talking about the 4th of July. That's the end of the introduction. He says it's not high-sounding. He's made his self-presentation, as it were. What then will the narration do? It's going to give you context. Yes, exactly right. It's going to give you context. And he begins by giving that context and saying that this is the birthday of your national independence. This is to you what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It has signs and wonders associated with that act. Now, as you read this, did you notice in this speech a fair amount of religious imagery? Yes. There's quite a lot of religious imagery. And it's used quite intentionally by Douglas, not for a specific purpose of doctrine or dogma, but to illustrate a struggle which he sees has analogs in a text that most of his audience would know pretty well. And so he turns to it often. He says, this celebration marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. There's the narrative right there. 76 years since the Declaration of Independence. So there's a kind of built-in narrative here. Why does he say you and your? Notice these pronouns. Why doesn't he say our and we?
Yeah, so I think he's giving like ownership over the freedoms that citizens have to white citizens, and like pointing out subtly that that's not something that he enjoys or people, African Americans in the country enjoy as well.
Yes. It's not mine. It's yours. It's yours. You had a comment too?
Oh, yeah. It provides a contrast between his life and those in the audience.
Yes, it does. It provides this contrast between someone who is enslaved. The introduction was I. And now the narration is you. Now, as you read the address, note how the pronouns either stay the same or shift. Note what happens to the pronouns by the time we get to the end of the address. It's very important because in speaking to an audience, you can separate yourself from them, and sometimes that's necessary. Or you can hope to join them in a process of solidarity, which is also sometimes necessary. So this narration is pretty clear. He says, 80 years and 10 is the allotted time for an individual men, again, quoting the Bible, but nations number their years by thousands. So the whole point of a lot of this narration is time. What has happened? What has been going on in these 76 years? Does he say that there is a cause for celebration? He says it's fashionable now to celebrate. He uses that word several times. He says it's fashionable. There's excitement. But what is the problem with this kind of celebration? Should we be happy?
I mean, I guess the problem is the celebration is hypocritical because they're celebrating earning their freedom when so much of the country doesn't.
Yes, he uses the word hypocrisy in the address. This is a problem. And there's furthermore greater contrast because he's saying, you all now celebrate this with great fanfare, great pomp, great excitement. But what was it actually that your ancestors did who did fight in the revolution? What did they do? Did they just go out and celebrate July 4th and tell the British to go away? No, what did they do? They fought. They fought. And in fact, they had the courage to say that they were oppressed, that they were being treated in a tyrannical manner. And they were willing to put their lives on the line. To this we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You know the story when John Hancock signed his name so large. Now I know you see it at Fenway Park and you see John Hancock and it's an insurance company. Why is that signature famous? It's on the Declaration of Independence. It's the biggest signature of all. And Hancock said after he signed it, the king will not need his spectacles to read this. Why did that take a little bit of courage?
Revolution didn't work out, then the people who signed that document probably would have been severely punished?
Yes, severely punished may, in this case, possibly be a euphemism. They would have been regarded as treasonous, they were regarded as treasonous, and that's a capital crime. You can be executed for it. So, Douglas is here drawing a contrast to those people celebrating the July 4th now, as we often do in the United States, with those who actually made it possible. What they did to make it possible was they rose up against a tyranny. They put their lives on the line. And now what are we doing? Well, we're celebrating that. We're very happy with it. But what exists today? What exists today in Douglas's time? Right as he's giving this address. Yes, slavery. And he regards that as a system of deep oppression, as deep and black as was the British oppression of the colonies, if not more so. So by drawing these parallels and these contrasts, Douglas has already got people thinking about why celebrate the 4th of July? What is the purpose of that celebration? And what does it say about your courage and your commitment that you are willing to go out and celebrate it, maybe have some beer or whiskey, and listen to some music, and hear an oration, and feel good about things, when in fact what is going on in this country is a terrible oppression which should be distasteful to all. Then he starts to talk a little bit about what the Declaration of Independence actually has to say. And he says it is your ring bolt. Did anyone look up what a ring bolt is on a chain? It's the thing that holds the chain fast. And if you have a ring bolt, and then he talks about a sheet anchor. Is there a sailor here? No? Does anyone know what a sheet anchor is? It's kind of an anchor of last resort. When all other anchors fail, you got a sheet anchor and it's going to hold that ship. And so he refers to the country as a ship of state, and he says, what are your principles? The principles are those that are in the Declaration of Independence, and later, at the end of the address, he turns to the Constitution. Now, it's very interesting that Abraham Lincoln said that his principles were embodied in 3 documents only: the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Northwest Ordinance. What is the Northwest Ordinance? Who here studied American history in secondary school? What is the Northwest Ordinance?
So if I'm remembering correctly, it was a law passed that allowed new states, when they joined the Union, to declare themselves whether they would be free or slave.
Close, but not quite right. The Northwest Ordinance actually said those states in the Northwest would be free states. Okay? And it was signed by many of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence and who approved the Constitution. And that's why Lincoln says that those three documents embody his convictions. Now, the Northwest Ordinance is not mentioned here by Douglas, but he mentions the Declaration of Independence, and he says, think about these principles, and think about the people who fought for them. They loved their country better than their own private interests. And though this is not the highest form of human excellence, all will concede that it is a rare virtue, and that when it is exhibited, it ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country, and notice that very interesting qualifying adverb, intelligently. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, and there's a quotation from the Declaration of Independence right there, embedded, on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests. Well, he said a little earlier, all people hate change, except what kinds of change? What kind of change? If you're thinking about economic interests, what kind of change might you like? Yeah, you might like gold or silver or even copper. And he says that, and he begins this great theme, which is later taken up by many others, including W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King Jr., that slavery, even after abolished, continued as a form of economic oppression. So he says that people who don't want change now, they hate all changes but silver, gold, and copper change. Of this sort of change, they are always strongly in favor. Why? Because it is their self-interest. It's what they want. Now, I'll pause here just for a second and ask a question that many of you will ask yourselves in the course of the next few years.